On the evening of the 3rd of May, 2007, the small Portuguese coastal village of Praia da Luz was filled with tourists enjoying the warmth of the Algarve spring. The streets were calm, families were finishing dinner, children were sleeping inside holiday apartments. To most people, it was simply another peaceful night beside the Atlantic Ocean. But inside apartment 5A at the Ocean Club Resort, something was about to happen that would change the lives of one family forever. A 3-year-old girl was sleeping in the room she shared with her younger twin siblings. Her name was Madeleine McCann. She had traveled from England with her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, for what was supposed to be a relaxing family holiday. A few hours earlier, she had been enjoying time with her family. A few hours later, she would be missing. At approximately 10 p.m., Kate McCann walked into the apartment expecting to see her children asleep. Instead, she discovered that Madeleine was no longer in her bed. The next few hours would begin a search across a small Portuguese village. The next few days would transform a local missing child case into a global investigation. And for years afterward, investigators, journalists, and the public would continue asking the same question. What happened to Madeleine McCann? Before Madeleine McCann became the center of one of the world's most followed missing person cases, she was simply a 3-year-old child growing up in England. Madeleine McCann was born on the 12th of May, 2003, in Leicester, England. She lived with her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, and her younger twin brother and sister, Sean and Amelie. Her parents were both medical professionals. Those who knew the family described Madeleine as a bright and energetic child. Like many children her age, she was curious about the world around her. She was at an age where every day brought new discoveries, new words, new experiences, new memories. In May 2007, the McCann family traveled to Portugal for a holiday. Their destination was Praia da Luz, a quiet coastal village in the Algarve region. The area was popular among European tourists because of its beaches, warm climate, and relaxed atmosphere. For the McCann family, it was meant to be a break from everyday life, a chance to spend time together, a chance to create happy memories. But the holiday would become one of the most examined events in modern criminal investigation. Praia da Luz was a place many visitors considered peaceful and familiar. The Ocean Club Resort where the McCann family stayed was designed for holidaymakers. It contained apartments, restaurants, swimming areas, and spaces where families could relax. The McCanns were traveling with a group of friends, several of whom also had young children. During the holiday, the group developed a routine. The children would sleep in their apartments while the adults ate dinner nearby. The restaurant was located within the resort complex. The distance was short enough that the adults could walk between the restaurant and their apartments. The group described a system where they would take turns checking on their children during the evening. This routine would later become one of the most discussed parts of the investigation. The question investigators needed to answer was simple. What happened during the short period between Madeleine being last seen and her disappearance being discovered? Thursday, the 3rd of May, 2007, began like many other days of the holiday. The weather was warm. Families enjoyed their time together. Nothing suggested that the evening would become a defining moment in modern crime history. Madeleine spent the day with her family. The children followed the normal rhythm of a holiday, playing, eating, resting, spending time together. As evening arrived, the adults prepared to go for dinner. The children were settled into apartment 5A. The apartment had 2 bedrooms. Madeleine and the twins were sleeping in one room. The adults then went to the nearby tapas restaurant inside the resort. The distance between the restaurant and the apartment became one of the central points of later investigation. Investigators would spend years examining the movement of people around the area that night. Who was present? Who was seen? Who could have accessed the apartment? Every detail would matter. The evening continued. According to accounts from the group, the adults checked on their children at different points throughout dinner. At around 9 p.m., Jerry McCann checked apartment 5A. He later said the children appeared to be sleeping. The evening continued. The adults remained at the restaurant. The children remained in the apartment. Then, shortly after 10 p.m., Kate McCann returned to check on the children. What happened next changed everything. Madeleine was gone. The bedroom was no longer the peaceful scene they expected to find. Instead, there was confusion, fear, and a desperate need to understand what had happened. Kate raised the alarm. The search began immediately. In the first moments after Madeleine was discovered missing, people around the resort began searching. Friends joined the effort. Hotel employees helped. Guests looked around the area. People searched gardens, pathways, and nearby locations. Madeleine's name echoed through the resort. The police were contacted. The investigation officially began. In missing child cases, time is critical. The earliest moments can provide information that later becomes impossible to recover. Investigators began trying to reconstruct the evening, the timeline, the movements of people, the location of witnesses, the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. Every person who had been nearby became important. Every memory had potential value. As investigators examined the circumstances of Madeleine's disappearance, they faced a complex situation. A child had disappeared from a holiday apartment. The location was inside a busy resort. Many people had been moving around the area. The investigation required answers to several critical questions. How had Madeleine disappeared? When exactly did it happen? Who had access to the area? What information could witnesses provide? The answers would not come quickly. The investigation would soon expand beyond Praia da Luz. The small Portuguese village would become known around the world, and Madeleine McCann's photograph would become one of the most recognized images connected to a missing person case. But before the world began searching for answers, investigators first had to understand what happened during one evening inside apartment 5A. Because every major investigation begins with the same thing, a timeline. And on the night Madeleine disappeared, that timeline had only just begun. Within hours of Madeleine McCann being reported missing, Praia da Luz changed completely. The quiet holiday village became the center of an international investigation. Police officers moved through the area. Search teams examined locations around the resort. Residents joined efforts to find the missing child. A photograph of Madeleine began circulating. The image showed a young girl with blonde hair and bright eyes, a child whose family had been enjoying a holiday only hours earlier. Now that image represented a desperate search for answers. As the investigation expanded, authorities began gathering information from everyone connected to the evening: friends, resort workers, tourists, local residents. The goal was to reconstruct the final known moments before Madeleine disappeared. Investigators needed to understand the environment around apartment 5, the people nearby, the movements around the resort, the details that might explain what happened. One of the most important parts of any investigation is establishing a timeline. For Madeleine's case, investigators examined the sequence of events on the 3rd of May, 2007. The McCann family had spent the day at the resort. That evening, Madeleine and the twins were placed in their apartment. The adults later went to dinner nearby. According to the group, they checked on their children throughout the evening. At approximately 9 p.m., Jerry McCann checked the apartment. Later, another member of the group checked their own children. Then, shortly after 10 p.m., Kate McCann discovered Madeleine was missing. The gap between the last confirmed sighting and the discovery of Madeleine missing became one of the most important parts of the investigation. Investigators examined every possible detail. Who was walking through the resort? Who may have been seen near the apartment? What information could witnesses provide? A case involving a missing child often depends on small details. A person remembered, a sound heard, a movement noticed, a moment that seemed ordinary at the time. As police continued investigating, witness accounts became a major part of the case. People who had been in Praia da Luz during the evening were interviewed. Some recalled seeing people around the resort. Some remembered movements or events that later became important to investigators. One of the most discussed accounts came from a British holidaymaker who reported seeing a man carrying a child in the area around the time Madeleine disappeared. The sighting became part of the investigation, although investigators continued examining different possibilities. The challenge was separating important information from details that could not be confirmed. Every investigation contains uncertainty. Witness memories can change over time. Different people can remember the same moment differently. Investigators had to carefully examine each statement. Meanwhile, the search for Madeleine continued. As days became weeks, Madeleine McCann's disappearance attracted worldwide attention. News organizations from different countries arrived in Portugal. The story appeared on television broadcasts across Europe and beyond. Millions of people followed developments. A global campaign was created to raise awareness and encourage anyone with information to come forward. Photographs of Madeleine appeared everywhere. Her family continued making appeals. They asked people to keep searching. They asked anyone who knew anything to speak. The attention brought support, but it also created enormous pressure. Every development became international news. Every new theory became public discussion. For investigators, maintaining a careful and evidence-based approach became increasingly difficult under the weight of worldwide attention. Police examined the apartment, collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, reviewed information from the resort and surrounding area. The case involved multiple possibilities. Investigators considered different explanations for Madeleine's disappearance. The evidence was examined from several angles. As the investigation continued, disagreements emerged over certain aspects of the police response and how information was handled. The intense media coverage added another layer of complexity. The investigation was no longer only about what happened inside apartment 5A. It had become a case followed by millions of people around the world. In September 2007, 4 months after Madeleine disappeared, Kate and Jerry McCann were named as suspects under Portuguese law. The decision created international headlines. The McCanns strongly denied any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. They continued to maintain that their daughter had been taken from the apartment. The case entered a new and highly controversial stage. Public discussion intensified. Media attention increased. But the investigation itself continued. Authorities continued examining evidence. They continued following leads. In July 2008, Portuguese authorities removed the McCann's suspect status and closed that stage of the investigation without charges being filed. But the central question remained unchanged. Madeleine McCann had not been found. For many missing person cases, time creates distance. Public attention fades. Investigations slow. But Madeleine's case remained in the public memory. Her family continued searching for answers. New information continued to be reviewed. Different authorities remained involved. The case became an example of how modern investigations can continue long after an initial disappearance. Years after Madeleine vanished, investigators were still examining information collected from the earliest days. Technology was changing. Forensic methods were improving, and a case that seemed to have reached a difficult stage was about to enter another chapter. In 2011, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Grange. The purpose was to conduct a detailed review of Madeleine's disappearance. British detectives examined thousands of documents. They reviewed previous evidence. They considered new lines of inquiry. The investigation showed how unresolved cases can change when technology and resources improve. Information that had been collected years earlier could be examined again. New questions could be asked. Old assumptions could be reviewed. Operation Grange did not simply reopen the case. It represented a fresh examination of one of the most complex missing person investigations in modern history. And years later, that investigation would lead authorities toward a new direction. The investigation into Christian Brückner, modern searches and forensic developments, the current legal position, the impact on Madeleine's family, the final unanswered questions. For years after Madeleine McCann disappeared, the investigation remained active. Behind the scenes, detectives continued reviewing information, examining evidence, and following possible leads. The case had already crossed borders. It involved authorities from Portugal, the United Kingdom, and other countries. But the central mystery remained the same. A 3-year-old child had disappeared from a holiday apartment, and more than a decade later, there was still no final answer about what happened that night. The passage of time created new challenges. Memories became older. Witnesses moved on. Evidence became harder to examine. But advances in technology also created new possibilities. Modern forensic methods allowed investigators to look again at information collected years earlier. Cases that once seemed impossible could sometimes be approached from a different direction. And in 2020, that direction changed. In June 2020, German prosecutors announced that they were investigating Christian Brückner in connection with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Brückner was a German citizen who had spent time in Portugal, including around the period when Madeleine disappeared. German authorities stated that they believed Madeleine was dead. The announcement brought renewed international attention to the case. After years without a major public development, investigators were now focusing on a specific person. However, an investigation is not the same as a conviction. Brückner denied involvement. He has not been convicted in relation to Madeleine's disappearance. The legal process requires evidence that meets the required standard. For investigators, the focus remained on examining evidence and determining what could be proven. In the years following the announcement, authorities continued investigating. German, Portuguese, and British officials remained involved in different parts of the case. In 2023, Portuguese authorities carried out searches connected to the investigation following a request from German authorities. The searches demonstrated that the case remained active. Even after many years, investigators were still looking for information that could explain what happened in Praia da Luz on the night Madeleine disappeared. The investigation showed one of the greatest challenges in cold cases. Time can make finding answers more difficult, but time can also bring new tools, new information, and new opportunities. When Madeleine disappeared in 2007, forensic technology was different from what it is today. Over time, investigators gained access to more advanced methods of examining evidence. Digital records, improved forensic analysis, international information sharing. These developments have changed how older cases are investigated. A detail that may have seemed insignificant years earlier can sometimes become important when viewed through new technology. For investigators working on unresolved cases, the goal remains the same: not speculation, not assumptions, but evidence. The search for answers depends on facts that can be examined and verified. Beyond police reports, evidence files, and courtroom discussions, there is a family that has lived with uncertainty for years. Kate and Jerry McCann have continued to appeal for information about their daughter. They have marked birthdays. They have remembered milestones. They have continued waiting for answers. Madeleine would now be an adult. The child whose photograph became known around the world has grown in the imagination of millions of people who followed the case. But for her family, the story has always been personal. A daughter, a sister, a missing member of a family still hoping for answers. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann remains one of the most widely followed missing person cases in modern history. It has involved multiple investigations, different countries, thousands of documents, years of searching. But one question remains at the center of everything. What happened inside apartment 5A on the night of the 3rd of May, 2007? The answer has remained unknown. Today, apartment 5A is remembered not simply as a holiday location. It represents the place where a family's ordinary evening became an international mystery. It represents years of investigation, years of searching, years of unanswered questions. The story of Madeleine McCann is not only about a missing child. It is also about the determination of investigators, the persistence of a family, and the hope that one day the truth will finally be known. Because in every unresolved case, there is always one thing investigators continue searching for: the missing piece. The piece of information that can connect the past to the present. The piece that can finally explain what happened. On the 3rd of May 2007, Madeleine McCann disappeared from Praia da Luz. More than 16 years later, the search continues. And until answers are found, the world continues asking, where is Madeleine McCann? And if you want true crime stories told with careful research, respect for the people involved, and focus on the evidence instead of empty shock, subscribe to the channel. No careless storytelling, no rushed conclusions, just real cases, real names, real timelines, and the unanswered questions that still deserve attention. Subscribe now, because the next story begins with one ordinary decision and ends with a mystery that still has no final answer.